Coming up, I'm going to share with you why James Gunn's new Suicide Squad movie might be my favorite DC movie yet. Let's get to it. Hey everyone, I'm Lee, the occasionally focused and well-adjusted brain behind Grimmleighs Fiends, and welcome to Grimmleighs Fiends. Every week we explore the creatures, monsters, and creepy cool creations that pop out throughout mythology, whether that be in current pop culture like our movies and comic books, or if it's through the mythology and legends that have been binding us together as a culture for the last few millennia. I'll also be introducing some creatures, concepts, and fairy tales of my own, so if that sounds like your idea of a good time, and why wouldn't it be, please drop this channel a like, and if you'd like, subscribe while you're at it. The Suicide Squad from James Gunn just landed in theaters and on HBO Max, and with the Delta variant of COVID-19 rampaging through lungs of friends and neighbors alike right now, I decided to stay in, skip the theater, and watch the movie in the comfort of my own home. And I'm really glad I did so, because those COVID numbers are on the uptick, and we all need to do our part to stay safe, be careful, and look out for our friends and neighbors. It's really easy to do when you're watching a movie that's this much fun, though. I will be keeping this review as spoiler-free as possible, but there are a couple of things that pop up towards the end of the movie that will cause me to go into spoiler territory, but I'll make sure to give you plenty of notice before I head that direction. If you're the kind of person that likes to skip around on a video, you might want to be careful for the last few minutes of this presentation. And as always, I'll be focusing heavily on the creatures and monsters that pop up in this movie, and there are a couple that are just amazing. I'll be up front here. I have a pretty rough relationship with the DC Cinematic Universe lately. I really like to like them. I really want to like them. I enjoy the source material in a big way. But lately, they've been so broody and dark and just not quite in my wheelhouse. I need a little bit of wonder and magic and optimism in my superhero movies. And lately, I've been finding that lacking. And I think maybe DC has been finding that lacking as well. So how do you go about bringing in some of that wonder and optimism that you see, for instance, in a lot of Marvel movies? Well, maybe you hire a Marvel director. That seems to be the case here with Guardians of the Galaxy's 1 and 2's James Gunn helming the latest Suicide Squad movie. And he brought his A game to this picture. I'll be completely honest. I thought I would enjoy the movie. I did not realize I was going to love the movie, but I've already watched it twice, and the movie's only been in general release for 2 days. So that's a pretty good track record. I haven't watched a movie more than once in its opening week in a couple of years. So a lot has been said about James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie not being connected to David Ayer's Suicide Squad movie, but there are some connective tissues at play in this film. First off is Viola Davis and her Amanda Waller character. She is an absolute force of nature in this movie. She was good in the first movie too. Let's give her credit where credit's due. She played a government hard ass like no one's business, and she definitely brings it back in this film, but she turns that intensity up to about 14. Keep in mind that dial only goes to 11. Margot Robbie is back as Harley Quinn, and she also brings her A game. You also have Joel Kinnaman bringing back Colonel Rick Flag for his second go-round with the Suicide Squad. And Jai Courtney is back as Captain Boomerang. It's really amazing to see what happens with these characters returning to the big screen under the supervision of a very gifted director, though. Viola Davis brings so much menace to the character of Amanda Waller that she's kind of hard to watch because she's terrifying. She really is that kind of person who is so zeroed in on her mission that she's going to do whatever it takes to do it. Damn the consequences, and there are no exceptions. Now, Margot Robbie is incredible once again as Harley Quinn. She's absolute magic in this role, and James Gunn knows it, and he focuses on her and the decisions she makes with that character instead of deciding to fix the camera to her butt and following that through the entirety of the movie. And yes, I am singling out David Ayer for that action. There's also a fantastic ensemble cast with Idris Elba swinging for the bleachers with his portrayal of Bloodsport. He's a mercenary who can turn just about anything into a weapon. And to counter that, because we love to deal with duality in our movies, is John Cena as Peacemaker. He's another guy who can turn anything into a weapon. And there's this fantastic interplay between the two actors, with Idris Elba playing more of a straight man to John Cena's wacky goofball will murder anybody for freedom character. There's a great interplay. It's like a really dour Bing Crosby to a really wacky muscle-bound Bob Hope. I hope that analogy works. You also have Daniela Melchior. She plays Ratcatcher 2. She's the daughter of the original Ratcatcher, which you really wouldn't know anything about, and unless you're a really hardcore DC Comics fan, you probably don't even know who Ratcatcher is. But Ratcatcher 2 is able to control rats with a device that her father developed. With that power and that ability to control rats, there's a lot of trouble and mischief that she could get into. She's drafted in this, but she also brings all of the heart that this movie has in huge abundance. It's all down to the character of Ratcatcher. She is the most human of all of the characters, and her belief in humanity, her simple belief that people can be better than their base selves, is this infectious binding material that ties the whole movie together. But again, going into that duality, you have another character in the Polka Dot Man, who is just an absolute mess of a human being. He is not stable. He's probably the most suicidal member of the Suicide Squad, and he's brought to life by David Dastmalchian. The character is a little bit manic, but he has that same heart that Ratcatcher has, but for completely different reasons. See, both of these characters have a strong connection to a parental figure. In the case of Ratcatcher 2, she loved her father, and even though she grew up in squalor with him, that connection to her father makes her just believe in the better qualities of people, whereas Polka Dot Man has a really bad relationship with another parent figure, and because of that, his humanity and his view of humanity is really greatly damaged, but he still has a great big heart, and on the inside, he wants to believe in a better world for people. He just kind of goes about it the wrong way. Polka Dot Man is not a character I expected to enjoy as much as I did. This is one of the weirdest, quirkiest, and dare I say, lamest characters in the DC Comics lineup, but he's really, really fun in this movie, and he is really tragic in this movie. And it's one of those things that James Gunn brings to his movies where his characters are so flawed and so human. It's amazing they can even get out of bed sometimes, let alone, do a suicidal, absolutely no chance of succeeding mission for the government in the hopes of getting 10 years removed from their sentence. You also get James Gunn's regular stable of actors with Michael Rooker playing Savant. He's a guy who can use just about any projectile accurately to kill things. There's a recurring theme going on there. You also have Nathan Fillion playing TDK. The less said about him, the better. It's something you should just let happen as you're watching the movie. There's some other new faces to the franchise as well, including Peter Capaldi's Thinker, who is a bit of a bad guy who is sitting on a secret on the island nation of Corto Maltese. He's a lot of fun. I really enjoy Peter Capaldi and what he does with the Thinker here. He's kind of a quirky, degenerate, scuzzy guy, and the things that he is up to in his lab, it's shudder-worthy. It's definitely showing a lot of the tricks James Gunn learned doing low-budget movies for Troma Films back before he did Slither and the Marvel movies. The performances, of course, are all top-notch. That's not surprising at all, considering James Gunn has this ability to collaborate with his actors and just bring out these incredible performances from his people. His characters in the Suicide Squad, they're your friends, they're your neighbors, they're that jerk that's in the cubicle across the hall from you, but they just happen to be serving multiple life sentences in prison for horrific murders. But they're still incredibly relatable characters. There's not a character on screen for more than 2 minutes that you don't go, oh, I know somebody like this. And that's how the movie works and makes these murderers, killers, and mercenaries really likable, surprisingly. Yeah, they're very likable. There's even some cameos from actors like Pete Davidson and Flula Borg that are a lot of fun. And frankly, I can't stand Pete Davidson in the best of circumstances. And I actually had a lot of fun with him in the Suicide Squad. So also not even remotely surprising is the incredibly good soundtrack that James Gunn put together for this movie. If you're a fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you know he puts together a great soundtrack, but he's free of the confines of what Peter Quill's mom would have presented to him with that mixtape from Guardians of the Galaxy 1. And he's not quite falling back on the musical tropes that he loves so much that were so present in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. In this movie, you have just some amazing range of music. The movie opens with Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues, which is a great choice for a movie about people who are incarcerated. Super cool. You also get music from the Fratellis, the Decemberists, one of my absolute favorite punk rock odes from back in the 80s, people who died from the Jim Carroll Band. It's all so good. And the way James Gunn plays with music in this movie is kind of mind-boggling. There's a scene where the Pixies' Hey is playing inside a car and the crew's driving around inside a city, and it's just the background music that's playing on the car radio. And then the action piece starts and the music is no longer in the car. It's the music that's playing during the action piece. And that happens a couple times throughout the movie where just background music in a scene suddenly becomes the driving music of the scene. And it's done so very well. And also, big mad props here for probably the best use of Louis Prima's Just a Gigolo that I have ever seen. There's a fantastic fight scene. I'm not going to get into details here, but it's a fight scene with Harley Quinn and some goons, and it's set to Louis Prima's Just a Gigolo. And there's something that Gunn does. This is not a song that you would ever hear a fight scene set to, but it just works. And Margot Robbie's stunt work is so good, and it's all her at action here. It's intense, but Gunn decides to do something here to show this violence from Harley's perspective. And if that's how she sees violence, that might explain the appeal of violence to her. I will not go into any more detail with it, but that scene with Harley, that fight scene with Harley to the Louis Prima song is so intense and so incredibly well done that I've watched it like half a dozen times. It was one of the great perks to being able to watch a movie at home, even though it was just released this week. So considering the state of the world right now with COVID, I'm really glad that HBO Max has decided to make their movies available theatrically and for home consumption. That's just a really good call. But let's get into the creatures. That's really what the mortar of this channel is all about, is the creatures and the monsters, those creepy cool things that go bump in the dark. And this movie has 3 of them that work very, very well, and they work for completely different reasons. And I'll get into those. I will be saving the 3rd creature for last, and I'll make sure to put a spoiler warning up because I'm not sure if a lot of people watching this are really aware of this villain or of this monster and how it works. But I'll get into that spoiler detail later, and I'll clearly mark it so that nobody stumbles across this accidentally and ruins the movie for themselves. But the first creature that's shown in Suicide Squad is Weasel. Weasel's a throwaway DC Comics character. He's basically like an anthropomorphic weasel character, right? It's just a hairy dude with a weasel face. And the Weasel's motion capture and portrayal is done by Sean Gunn. He's James Gunn's brother, and he was the weirdo Kirk from the Gilmore Girls. And he does the motion capture for Rocket Raccoon in the Guardians movies. He's also Yondu's right-hand man on the pirate ship. So, he's a funny guy. He's a gifted guy. But they made this weird choice that I love when it came to portraying Weasel. And if you're a Gen Xer like me, you are familiar with Berkeley Breathed Bloom County comics. They went with this Bill the Cat portrayal of Weasel, and you can't get it out of your head once you see it. All of the boogly eyes and the acting, that Bill the Cat stuff. And he's still kind of terrifying. He's still kind of scary. There's a bit where all of the Suicide Squad's on a plane, and they're really quite unsettled by Weasel. He's kind of freaky. He's definitely got mange or something going on. And they do something really cool too here in that there's a scene with Michael Rooker's character very early on, like in the first minute or 2 of the movie, where you go, oh, this sets the tone of how violent and aggressive and horrible this movie could be in its portrayal of wickedness against innocence, right? And then there's another scene that sets up with Weasel right towards the beginning of the mission that is so incredibly funny that you can't help but laugh and realize what kind of movie, again, you're going to be seeing. It's incredibly violent. It's very brutal. It's also very, very funny. But enough about Weasel. The next creature, monster, character that is brought into the Suicide Squad is King Shark. And King Shark he's got to be one of my favorite new monsters in cinema. He's a character that's shown up on the Flash TV series. He's been around on the comics. Sometimes he's a hammerhead shark guy. Sometimes he's just a shark guy. In this movie, he's basically a big, dumb slab of muscle. He's a hulking brute of a great white shark guy. He's got arms and legs. Other than that, he's a great white shark. And he really wants to be taken seriously. He really wants people to think that he's got more going on than he really does. His introduction scene is just sets the tone for the character. And he's done so well. I feel for the guy. He's dumb as bricks. A lot of that sympathy and relatability that you end up feeling for that character comes down to his portrayal, and it's a two-part portrayal. It's two people that played the character. Steve Agee did the motion capture work, and he did a great job with it. He's just basically this beat down, slump-shouldered, great white shark guy wearing Bermuda shorts. And then Sylvester Stallone did the vocal work for the character. And Stallone's a funny guy. If you only know Stallone from like Rocky movies and Rambo movies, you don't realize that he can be hysterically funny. He did a great movie in the early 90s called Oscar that still cracks me up to this day. The guy has some incredible comedic timing, and it's definitely on display throughout this movie. But what makes Killer Shark work is his relationship with Ratcatcher 2. He is a hungry shark. He wants to eat anything and everything, and he has a taste for human flesh, so he doesn't really care who he eats. And it's established very early on that his relationship with Ratcatcher becomes so important to him that he starts thinking about maybe having friends being more important than a full belly. And that's kind of his driving force throughout the movie. And that's also what brings him to life in such a huge way. Your best monsters throughout the history of monsters are the ones that have a broken sense of humanity. If you think about Frankenstein's monster, it's his humanity that makes him so tragic. And it's that tragicness that makes him so relatable and actually makes you feel for the monster. That's the case here with King Shark as well. He doesn't have anybody who cares for him. And so he has this broken sense of humanity. And when he starts to feel that sense of belonging, or that sense of, a constant theme with James Gunn movies is found family. So once he has that sense of found family, he becomes a very relatable, very human character, despite the fact that he's just a big, dumb shark wearing big, dumb Bermuda shorts. I should probably just get into the spoiler territory right now, because I can't talk any more about the creatures and monsters in the Suicide Squad movie without spoilers. So here comes the spoiler warning. I'm going to go into spoiler territory now. Please stop watching the video if you have not watched the Suicide Squad movie, and especially if you don't want to have things spoiled for you. Let's talk Starro the Conqueror. Starro is one of those Silver Age comics characters that is so ridiculous that he's kind of amazing. Starro the Conqueror was first introduced in Justice Society of America, issue 28, back in 1960. So the character's been around now 61, 62 years. And he really is just a gigantic starfish with a big googly eye in the middle of his chest. And he's been around through the Silver Age comics. Alan Moore brought him back for a brief period of time as a villain in Justice League comics. And his shtick is basically that he's this alien conqueror who can send out these spore Starros that attach to the faces of his victims, and he can then control them as these mindless automatons. And in the comics, things aren't quite so dire. If you get hit with a Starro, you lose your free will and you're being controlled by Starro, but usually some good guy saves the day. And in this movie, that's not the case. You do not want to get one of these Starro spores. You're done after that, and it's horrific, just like so many things in this movie can be. Starro is horrifying, and at first you don't get that. You don't get a sense of that. Instead, what you get is this 60-foot, 70-foot tall, lumbering blue and purple starfish monster with a big googly eye in the middle of its chest, lumbering around a city like an overgrown Power Rangers monster. You're waiting for a Megazord to show up and start trading blows with this thing. And it's kind of funny. It's a little bit silly. There's a desire to laugh at Starro, and then he starts launching the spores out, and then you get the masses of Starro zombies. It's not funny anymore at that point. Even when you have this 1960s Godzilla movie like monster lurching around and being destructive, the real human death count is too much to laugh at. And that's when things really kick into high gear. There's a really great fight between the Suicide Squad, just normal people who, for the most part, don't have great powers. I could say Polka Dot Man maybe has some fantastic powers, but he doesn't use them for any real good reason other than you'll see that in the movie. There's no point in me spoiling that for you. But this fight with Starro is so effective because of the audacity of James Gunn to reach into the history of a character like Starro the Conqueror and to say, you know what? I'm actually going to do that. I'm actually going to put Starro in my movie, and I'm not going to be worried about how stupid the character looks. I'm not going to be worried about the fact that he's a giant, chubby starfish and that should come across as ridiculous. He leans into the character design. He's not worried about trying to convey the menace with a giant purple smoke monster like Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, trying to bring in Galactus and deciding that, spooky smoke works better. In The Suicide Squad, James Gunn portrays Starro as a giant purple and blue starfish that just happens to be able to send out really scary small versions of himself to destroy the free will of anybody that it attaches itself to. It's not a subtle effect. It's really quite scary when it happens, and you start feeling for its victims because they don't have any free will anymore. And then Gunn decides to deliver the ultimate punch in the movie when the Suicide Squad finally prevails and Starro is defeated. You find out that Starro is actually a sympathetic character to a degree. He's not on Earth by any design of his own. He was captured, he was tortured, he was experimented on. He's a victim. The monster reveal for the end of the movie turns out to be just another victim of the real villain in the story. Yeah, it's the United States government. And that works. I think that works for just about anybody of any political ideation. You're going to be able to look at the government at some point, some way, and say that you disagree with something they did. Here, what they did was fund the research of the Starro monster, and they funded it at the cost of human lives. And that's why Waller is so desperate to cover up what's going on Corto Maltese. And she doesn't care how many victims end up piling up in the process. She doesn't care if they're guilty or they're innocent. That secret needs to be protected at all cost. The real villain isn't the bad guy with the gun. The real villain isn't the weird weasel werewolf character. The real villain isn't the shark man. The real villain isn't the giant 60-foot tall blue and purple starfish monster. The real villain is a government that doesn't value human lives. The actions of this government are absolutely terrifying, and it helps hammer home in a very real and believable way a movie that features some really ridiculous characters that shouldn't work. It's that real world application of menace from something that we could all potentially relate to in some way, shape, or form that makes a movie with a giant Technicolor starfish monster work pretty well. Now, if you haven't caught on yet, this movie is absolutely not for most kids. Now, of course, know your kids and know what your kids can handle. But I would say most children under the age of 14 should not watch this movie. It is explicitly gory. It has a lot of profanity. Now, a lot of people aren't worried about their kids hearing profanity. And if that's cool with you, that's cool with me too. James Gunn also knows that there are going to be some people that are going to bring their kids to see this movie. And because of that, he decides to go through with a couple of odd choices in gratuitous nudity. It's not a deal breaker by any means. I actually found it really funny. But if you're a person who's going to flinch back from a lot of profanity, a lot of exploding body parts, very inventively exploding body parts, I should say, and a pretty blatant example of the male anatomy on display, this is not a movie you want your kids to see. But who am I to tell you what you should let your kids see? The Suicide Squad from James Gunn is seriously, now at this point in my life, my favorite DC Cinematic Universe movie to date. I have a lot of favorites when it comes to DC movies. I'm not saying that it's the best DC movie made to date, but it is absolutely my favorite. There is a lot I did not expect to see in this movie that hit all of the right happy buttons for me. So for that reason and that reason alone, I have to recommend this movie. It's extraordinarily violent. It's not a movie that's made for everybody. But if you like movies with found family dynamics, with incredibly cool portrayals of really neat, tragic, broken people, and if you like a fantastic soundtrack, the Suicide Squad movie is definitely one to see. Whether you want to see it on the big screen or the small screen, that's completely up to you. I know I'm going to continue exercising my ability to watch movies at home until we get out of this particular shade of pandemic. I would love to hear what you think. Did you enjoy the Suicide Squad movie? Did you think they maybe took some things too far? I'd love to have some civil discourse with you. in the comments below. And thanks so much for checking out this review. If this is the kind of content you like, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I'll be talking about monsters, myths, and legends every single week. And from time to time, I'll even bring some original creepy cool content to share. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. The best is yet to come.